It's a nice sunny day, so quite down. It's 6 o'clock. We are live streaming at the moment. It is. So we're trying to keep the meeting short and succinct, questions to the point rather than statements. We have visitors today to talk about housing associations, which is great. But we'll start with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Rose Llewellyn, Councillor Rebecca Began, and Councillor Gary Sumner, Councillor Matthew Valentine deputising. And apologies for absence have also been received from Councillor Sankar and Cover for agenda item 7, Councillor Jacob Champer is deputising, and from Councillor Abdul Amin and Councillor Lawrence Ali is deputising.
So, each such then. Item 2 is declarations of interest. At the start of every meeting, we need to remind members that at any point during the conversations or decision making that we do, you believe that you have a personal or personal traditional interest, please indicate during the item, or you may indicate now so we can capture it early doors. Councillor Wilson.
My father was a resident at Windmill Court, which is a Stormwater Housing Association sheltered housing complex. That was until April last year. So basically, that's the context. But he no longer is. He lived with me because the service charges were too expensive.
Personal but not beneficial. Yeah. Thank you. Any other members? No. Moving swiftly then to Councillor Davis.
There's no minutes of previous meeting, is that right? Just wondering why.
Good question.
It's only due to the fact that there have been many meetings in April,
Okay.
so there hasn't been some register.
And that's fine, it's just worth making. Yeah.
Public question time is next. We've got a few members of the public attending. We normally have 50 minutes at the start of every council meeting to allow people to ask questions. We'll try and answer them where we can, but if we can't, we'll make sure that you get a written response in the next week from council officers that will be copied to committee members. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask any questions of the committee or the attendees tonight?
You want me to come down there?
Please, yeah. Switch the microphone on, the big button in the middle, and just give them name and your address for the record. Some questions.
Is that, yeah. I'm going to read this from my so Stormwater as a housing association.
Sorry, so just before you start, could you give me your name and
Oh, sorry,
just so we got it.
Yeah, Terence Stanley, and I live at Windmill Court, which is a stormwater problem. Excuse me, my voice is going a bit. Right. Stormwater is a housing association required to provide housing, affordable housing, for which they are afforded charitable status, which they benefit from. However, I do not think that they're fulfilling this criteria because the rents and service charge are beyond the means of the residents who use their homes. The outcome is that the residents are forced to ask the council for financial support, thereby putting the council under extreme financial pressure. Although there is some legal restraints on the rent they are allowed to charge, which are far too high, service charges are ridiculous and no one seems to be able to challenge them. People with limited means cannot afford to employ the services of someone with the legal and financial experience to challenge their figures. Therefore, it would seem that Swindon Borough Council may well be able to employ someone with the necessary skills and hopefully reduce the service charge bills for the residents in turn would need less financial support. The service charge would seem to be a guessing game A year ago, last November, it took Stonewater 3 attempts to come up with a figure that was seemingly correct, which is symptomatic of the company's ability in running their business. When I first came to Windmill Court, the landlords were Southern Housing. We had a review of service charges in November.
Sorry to interrupt. Any questions rather than?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Well, yeah, I'm coming. Well, the question was really, would it be possible for Swindon Borough Council to employ somebody to review these charges, which are obviously giving you financial headaches? We were, when it was Southern Housing, we had a review of service charge in November and revised the following February of the revised figure, which was implemented in April. This worked reasonably well and gave the tenants some peace of mind. With Stonewater, their method causes anxiety and mental health issues, dreading the letters coming through their doors. Older folk find it much harder to deal with this pressure at a time when they should be enjoying a peaceful and well-deserved rest after decades of working. Now, if it's possible to review these charges, which seem to be the problem that is giving everybody a headache, then that might mitigate the amounts that were being charged.
Thank you for your points. Well, we don't know the ins and outs of that, your particular case on that. That was informative. So we've made a note of your question. I don't think there's anything in particular that we can answer now. We'll try and raise it in the main agenda session on housing associations.
Okay.
And we'll try and address it that way. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Sir, back to you the same, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dave Griffiths. I'm actually a leaseholder of Stonewater property, and I have asked to put in a written question. And I would totally endorse what the previous speaker has said about Stonewater. My question is, how do Stonewater ensure that individual schemes get the best value for money for services rather than generic suppliers which do not benefit everyone and cannot necessarily lead to them supplying value for money? And I ask that in particular because as a leaseholder, we are slightly different from a rented accommodation in as much as that we pay for the services that they supply, but they don't consult with us. So I would like to know how they differentiate between rented accommodation and leasehold accommodation, of which there is only 7 sites in the Stonewater portfolio that I believe are leasehold. So we actually feel that we don't get best value for money.
Thank you. Again, we can't necessarily address that immediately, but we'll ask the questions in the next item and at the very least get you a follow-up written response to points you raised. In terms of what we say about companies and organisations, we should be careful about how we comment about things. I know you're quite passionate about it, but we as a committee need to be quite careful in terms of what we say. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? No? Last chance? No, we'll move then on to the next item. Currently it's down as housing associations, but we've had a request to bring forward the periodic reports of children and adults to allow attendees to go to other parish council meetings. Is committee happy to bring that item forward? I personally don't have any questions on this other than to thank the committees involved. Do other members have any questions? We've got Councillor Chandler here tonight who can help answer anything from the Children's and Adults ONS. Or are you happy to note the reports and pass our thanks to them?
I'm happy to know, Chair. Yes,
Happy with that?
Yeah, happy to know.
Thank you very much. So item 7 is duly noted. Back Back onto item 4, which is the role of housing associations alongside the council. Over the last 12 months, as a committee, we've tried to take a slightly different approach where it's much more thematic based, and we've had good conversations with Thames Water, with recommendations coming out both of them as a company, but also importantly with the council. And there's a follow-up item on that agenda this evening. Tonight's one was meant to be on housing associations and how they operate, but also how we can improve as a council the way we interact, and particularly as councillors representing residents. And we've got similar kind of topics for future meetings on different areas. So tonight's one is on housing associations. Looking to committees, just to kind of introduce that we've got attendees.
Yes, so we do have Marie Riordan from Stonewater today, also Decision from Sanctuary, and Dean Jarvis from the Township.
Your attendance, please come to the table, please. I believe we've got the housing director from the council present. Come first as well, please. So thank you all for attending tonight. This is not a gotcha exercise. It's very much trying to use our scrutiny authority to find ways in which we can represent residents in a slightly different way and make sure that the council is working as best as we can with yourselves, or with our recommendations you can kind of take forward back into your own organisation. It's meant to be an open conversation, so we're quite careful about how we approach this. I will put everybody on the spot to start with, and if you could kind of just introduce yourself to the committee so we can kind of see who you are, and a little bit about your role when it comes to housing associations. I will start with our own housing director.
Okay, hello, I'm Andrew McDonald. I'm the interim director of housing at Swindon. So happy to take any questions if there are any. I don't know, just to confirm, my colleague Rob did prepare a presentation that is going to be, okay, fine, just checking. So that will explain some of it, because to address some of the questions that we've already had, one of the things we need to be aware of is they are separate entities, and Swindon Council doesn't have authority over how a housing association runs, and that will be made clear potentially by our guests from other places. I'll pass it on.
Hello there, I'm Tim Chambers. I'm a customer liaison manager with the Guinness Partnership. Customer liaison manager is essentially like the old housing manager role that we have within housing associations. I manage all of Guinness's stock in Swindon, as well as other cities and rural areas, West of England. Yeah, happy to talk everything today.
Hi, I'm Rob Anscombe. I'm the Allocations and Lettings Operations Manager. I manage the team that's responsible for maintaining the housing register, so those wanting to access housing within the Borough of Swindon. Also manage the team that deals with the lettings of properties to Swindon Borough Council properties when they come through and do the verification checks.
Hi, I'm Marie Riordan. I'm the Director of Development for South and Central Regions at Stonewater. So I head up the teams that build the new affordable homes. So we focus on affordable rent, social rent, rent to buy and shared ownership. And Swindon is a key area for Stonewater.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ilse Tustian, Area Manager for Sanctuary Housing. I manage the local housing teams for Swindon and also for a lot of areas across the southwest of the country. And that's really this area called tenancy management, state management, things like that. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. The committee services have put the presentation on the screen for us to walk through initially to frame things. It has been pre-circulated on the agenda papers, so hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to look at it. I'll just make emphasis that it is a pet hate if we read slides, and the slides. They're very much there as a prompt and open conversation, so please don't read slides.
Okay, so basically, with regards to the council and how we deal with housing associations through a professional thing, so I thought it was easier to say the only difference is really about is that the council is obviously self-funded in a different way to housing association. They're more charity based from that, and the slight difference that we have is tenants, 10 years, like tenancy agreements and stuff in there. So whether you are a council tenant, you would have an introductory tenancy for the first 12 months going into a secure tenancy. For a housing association, that would be a start to going into assured. They're kind of similar, but there is certain tweaks given in that, but by all means, they're quite secure tenancies from there. Housing associations said with their own tenancy agreements, so in there they'll have their own terms and conditions. Usually they're very specific, similar to what the local authority ones will be, but it will be down to what they've got within that set own. So Stonewater will be slightly different to Sanctuary, what may be slightly different to Guinness on that side of things. But they're all governed by certain specific things that they have to have in by law. So sometimes it may be just how they've written the thing into the tenancy. Within Swindon, if we go to the next slide, within Swindon, we've got many housing providers that offer social housing. They have various amounts of stock. I believe Stonewater is probably the biggest housing association in the borough with regards to the stock. Swindon Borough Council are the main social housing provider with roughly around about 10,300, 10,400 stock. Within online, we've got the details of if our customers want to access it, we will have online the links to where they goes into to their relevant housing providers. So we can go to the next slide. So part of the thing that we have to have with a housing association is a nomination agreement. So this is a contract to say how we're going to let properties. So most nomination agreements, they will have a first let and a subsequent let policy. So our nomination agreements that we have with all of our housing providers for first lets, which is usually new builds or newly acquired properties, we have 100% nomination rights. So that means it goes onto our choice-based lettings and is eligible to bid. Then on the majority of our nomination agreements, subsequent lets is up to 75. So we have a minimum 75%. So that's basically true voids. So what I mean by true voids is if somebody's terminated, somebody may have passed away, and that then becomes a true void. It's not a void if it's a mutual exchange or a succession, that's from there. Mostly in Swindon, we normally get 100% of relets from most of our housing providers. However, there are some who will retain that right. So they have their own urgent moves. So they may have cases where they need to move somebody urgently. They have that right within that level of agreement. So as I mentioned about choice-based lettings in Swindon, we operate a choice-based letting system. So basically what that means is we advertise properties on our website and people will then place bids on the web page and that side. And that's done within banding. So the higher the banding, you're likely to get shortlisted from there on the top. So we have 4 bands, band E, A, B and O. So E is emergency. We don't have many people in there because that's what we want it to be. It's a quick turn. A is our priority banding. So A is the ones where we have most of the medicals, if there's priority need and everything from that side. Then you've got B, which is in housing need, and O other is usually for homeowners over the age of 60 who wants to go into a sheltered property, as we do allow for that. So from there, it's also for those under work to move scheme, which is a government initiative which allows people from another area who wants to work who's working in Swindon that they can actually move. So we put that as a band O. How the banding then works is as A is normally the one we will come across. We've got 2 people bid on the same property in band A. It's the one with the longest banding date. So when somebody applies for housing, they will be given a banding date, and that banding date, if it was a band B, and they then change to band A 3 months later, their band A will be the 3 months later banding date. So it's when they've gone into that banding. If they go down from a band A, which is rare, to back to band B, it goes back to the original band B, so they don't lose time on the housing register on that. The bidding cycle runs at the moment between a Thursday morning to Tuesday. So from tomorrow, just before midnight, it will shut. And shortlisting is done by the team on a Wednesday. All but 2 housing associations, Swindon Borough Council will do the shortlist and nominates to them. But SNG and Bromford do their own shortlisting as they've got access to the system, so they do their own shortlisting from there. Next slide. As I said, from the nominations, so once we've nominated someone, so we will send that information over to relevant housing providers, and they will carry out their initial checks. We'll also tell the customers we've nominated them to them, and that any dealings will be picked up by the housing provider. Housing providers will then do their checks in line with their own policies, so they'll have their own policies in relation to how they let, financial checks and everything from there. If there's any specifications of any specific things they want to restrict or anything, that would be on the advert when it goes out for choice-based letting. So sometimes they may have put on the advert is no history of drug and alcohol abuse over the last 2 years, mainly because they may have evicted somebody for that reason and they're looking to give a respite for that type of property on there. Or it may be the fact where we've had before, priority will be given to wheelchair users first because they've actually got a property which is fully wheelchair accessible and they want to make sure that it goes to the right person from there. Once they've got the details and everything, as I said, they'll carry out their checks and then it will be that they will then say, yes, they passed the checks, or no, we need a new name. If they need a new name, they'll notify Swindon Borough Council, and we can challenge at that time to say, look at why they've been refused and from that side of things. But if we're happy with that, we'll give them the next person on the shortlist from there. Yeah. So how we contact, so if everything goes well, Housing Association will then sign them up. They will go through all the terms and conditions. And as I said, it will be their unique tenancy agreement, how they do. They will tell them, obviously, most properties are unfurnished. But if there is properties with carpets or white goods, they would normally advise them of that. And usually they'll be gifted rather than actually this has been provided and we'll maintain from that side of things. They'll let them know what the rent's going to be. And within the tenancy agreement, it will say about their responsibility as a landlord, which would be obviously from the rent, antisocial behaviour, succession, or any other issues related to that tenancy agreement. From Swindon Borough's point of view, with a housing association, we will deal with them if they're doing any new builds, and from that side of things. If they're advertising new properties, then we'll deal from that side of things. And if we're contacted because they've exhausted all options and they need to move somebody urgently, we would have that. However, that will always be led by the housing associations because they will have their own antisocial behaviour teams. So rather than having the customer have to duplicate information to different areas and the police and everyone having to do that, we will always say housing association lead on that and provide us the written evidence from that. With the customer, once moved, they will then be part of the new housing association's family and with regards to how they deal with their tenancies, because they were set up in the same way, similar as Swindon Borough Council. They'll have their housing officers, they'll have their social behaviour officers, they'll have their money advisors, they'll have different mechanisms within their own organisations, similar to Swindon Borough Council. They'll be called different names, but by and large, it's a similar thing from there. They will get back in touch with us if there's a significant change. So there's a significant change in their housing. So all of a sudden they're in a 1-bedroom and they've just had a baby. So then they will want to rejoin to have a 2-bedroom accommodation from that side of things. Or if their health changes and they're on a 3rd floor with no lift and they need to be on the ground floor. So that's when they will come back on from there. Next slide. I've been asked obviously from this side, and section 106 it's just basically, it's a contract, and under all developments, I think we've said in there that we would normally expect something about 30% for social housing, that we normally get 20%. That's usually the planning decision on that side of things, and but any questions on 106 can be put in written format because Nick Emmett was unfortunately not able to come here today for this. So we skip, and I think any questions, I think, from, because that's probably from Swindon side of things. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I found that really interesting, and it's a really good summary of housing association thing, because these videos will be on YouTube, and it might be worth, if anyone needs to know how housing associations work, I'll be directing them to this, because that's a really good summary. Thank you. And just some specific questions, I guess. You said that two do their own shortlisting. How does that work? Are they doing it?
So yeah, so what we do is we're changing our housing system. So, but currently our housing system that we've got, we can give authorisations for the housing provider to actually go in, put their adverts on, and actually they will do the shortlist. So my officers don't need to have a look. So they've got the access to a system to be able to do that. So it's only to their properties that they've advertised on there. So, and they would do that in line with the policy from there. So they would need to look at the top one on there and everything from there. How we monitor that is that we carry out audits on that. So we do proof checks on that side of things. Not on every single property, but we will do ad hoc audits along the way just to make sure that they're abiding by everything, and if there's anything missed from there.
So will people have applied to various housing associations? So they apply to one?
No.
We want Jim and we want Jim.
Yeah, so how it works is on choice-based lettings, we advertise all the Swindon Borough Councils and all the housing associations. For those housing associations, if they advertise this week, it will only be that shortlist that they pick up of all the properties they've advertised that week and everything from there. So the customers won't see any change on that side of things. They will bid, so they'll have a whole selection. So I think, for example, there's 2 bungalows on this week, both by different providers. They can bid on one of those bungalows if they're eligible. They will bid on the one they want. If the one is they bid on is Swindon Borough Council, Swindon Borough Council will do, and that's my lettings team will do that. If they bid on the one that's actually being advertised by SNG, then SNG will do the shortlist, but it's exactly the same shortlist as what we would see, and we can keep track of it.
Thank you. How many O's get houses?
O's, it's not a lot on that side. It's usually for the sheltered schemes from that, and that's what we've kind of used, because the O's are usually not in housing need. So the reason why we've said they're homeowners in who want to go into a sheltered scheme only would be on the O's from there. It's not a lot, and I think we would always say that if situations changes, we will always review and we do review those on the housing register every 12 months now. So everyone on there. So if they haven't notified of us, they usually will tell us on the 12-month review if there's a change, because actually they may no longer be they may have changed significantly. Because you can be a homeowner, but actually if their health has really deteriorated and you can't do those adaptations of that earlier, we would need to look at it under a medical to see if you're eligible that way.
Okay. One more comment. So one thing that I know various councillors have an issue with is contact with housing associations and being able to escalate issues on behalf of residents. From what you're saying, I understand that, so you have a reasonable relationship with housing associations. So would it be reasonable if we are struggling to get in touch with housing associations to go through Borough Council and say, I've got this issue, can you raise it?
No, I mean they'll have their own teams and everything from that side of things. So we would only deal with a small proportion from the letting, maybe from the letting side of things, from that side of things. So if it's to do with tenancy, I think from that side it's a totally different piece. So and I think it's just about probably building up a relationship with colleagues here to say who's the best people to go into as councillors from that, because obviously with Swindon Borough Council we're quite fortunate that we are the biggest stockholders on there, so we can give you the service from that side of things and we can respond quite well. But I know it's slightly different with the housing associations because they will be based in so many different parts of the country and their teams and dynamics from there. So I may have a contact who is not going to be able to answer on that, and we won't always get there. So we have tried before, but we don't always get that response back on other matters. But I don't know if I'll open it up to colleagues for listening.
I was just going to add, it does seem like that would add an unnecessary extra step in, but if it sounds like you need to improve contact details with housing providers, I'm happy for Sanctuary's sake to write that to the group. So, but yeah, I think everybody will have different ways of doing it. We have our local operations teams, and I would hope most of our councillors and our MPs will have our housing officers' direct details, but we also have national teams as well who do certain things. I suppose it depends on the particular issues you're experiencing, but yes, I can help with contact details if that's something that you need.
Yeah, I think so. I've had the experience before of being told that housing associations can't deal with councillors because of data protection, for example. So I think getting a good way, a standard way for councillors to be able to escalate issues on behalf of their residents, I think that would be a really good outcome, if
I
possible.
think, from Sanctuary's perspective anyway, after GDPR implementation in 2018, that was a very short-term issue by our centralised contact centres. It's not an issue anymore. So I don't know if much of anybody.
Thank you. We've got 4 members with questions before we kind of move around to our visitors. I've got a couple of initial questions myself to SEC. One's in terms of scale, because the report and the presentation don't necessarily cover how many properties we're really dealing with when it comes to council HRA versus housing association. I know we're around the 10,300, 10,400. The business plan expects 100 fewer houses over the next 10 years. But the only number I could find was 16,223 for registered social rent properties. So is that 10 plus 6, as in 10 for council, 6 for housing associations? Is that 10,000 for council, 16,000 for housing associations? Do we have a specific number in mind about how many properties in the town are covered by HAs?
Not to hand, but put it down as, and I'll give you the information.
Okay. Similarly, do we have a list of all HAs in Swindon who kind of operate here? Do they need to register centrally and kind of lead into Councillor Davis's point? Do we have a contact for each of those?
In relation to the housing associations we're compiling up a list of all the properties of the housing associations that we know in Swindon. It's nearly completed, to be fair. I think there's only about another 3 that we're waiting response back on. But that will tell you obviously where the streets and that, where they've got the stock and what kind of size stock they've got and that. So in relation to that.
Thank you. And just before we move on then, just the kind of clarity. The HAs don't typically charge market rent. Social rent's around 50% and affordable rent is 80%. So the government sets the increases every year via CPI in September. Do we, as a council, have any kind of involvement in that process? And then similarly, when it comes to how our service charges addressed, do we have any oversight?
For housing associations, no. For our own, as a governor from that side of things, you know how we do within Swindon Borough Council. So that's really consultation from the relevant grants things. But from housing associations, no, we won't have any impact on how they set their charges. That's obviously go each individual business from there.
Councillor Ballender, Adams, Shelley, and then Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you for the presentation. Slight bit of deja vu with me as when we were discussing our one of the cases in my ward. So I want to just say thank you for the Levels team for that one. Councillor Davies actually stole quite a few of my questions, so it's nice to see a bit of cross-party thinking. What I sort of want to very briefly pick up on is around the frequency of the audits and the checking. Are we sort of, how often are they going to be audited if what's they will have access to the system? Is that going to be something that's, I appreciate not every housing applications to be checked, because that's what defeats the point of allowing to have access. But how much oversight will there be from SBC on that sort of things?
It all depends how many they're advertising from there. If they're not advertising a great deal, we can pretty much audit most, if not all, from that side of things. However, if there's a big influx or anything from there, we would take, say, about 10, 20%, something from that side of things, just dip in on that side. And that's usually when there's a new build. So, but as I said, because on the new build, it's quite straightforward because we've got 100% nomination rights on that. So it's just to ensure that those are going and they're not skipping people where they need from that list.
And I'm also going to pick up a slight follow-up from Councillor Dave's other question about the points of contact. One of the challenges that I've had in my ward, where there have been repair issues, you're going through the generic sort of contact @ email address, and it's taking weeks and weeks and weeks to go back and forth to get these issues resolved. And some of them have been quite urgent maintenance issues. And I think some of the work, just trying to find that dedicated contact list, almost a council/MP hotline, where we have had a resident contact. There's lots of companies have similar. And that's something that's definitely worth looking at in a bit more detail, where we can actually, a dedicated inbox and say, we have X emergency companies, and our residents don't necessarily know the difference. I think that's something I would definitely press that point.
Can I come in on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to say that at Stonewater, we do accept contact from anybody. It doesn't have to be one of our customers. So we do have access points for that contact, whether it's an MP, a councillor, a local resident, like I said, who isn't a customer. We did also write recently to the council to say that myself and my colleague Helena would be kind of our stakeholder leads for the council at Stonewater. So if it's easier for you, please just get in contact with me, and Catalina's got my contact details. I would happily be that point of contact. Won't be able to answer all the questions, but I can at least point you in the right direction or make that contact for you.
Say something on that. I think the issue you're going to have is quite a lot of housing associations. They're all going to have different ways of contacting them. If you want some kind of special contact, I think the difficulty you'll have is you'll have to have someone coordinating that list, because the options will change over time. Because what you want essentially is some people. Those people will change, so you'll need to have somebody managing the list. Other than the usual sort of, we all advertise ways to contact us on our website, but I think you're looking for an alternative, and so someone's going to have to manage a big list of contacts.
Just very quickly, credit to Stonewater, they've got stakeholder contact at stonewater.org, and that's Annie Langley, I think, was the person I've been in touch with. That wouldn't need to be a named person, could be a named inbox.
Sure, yeah, it could be, but some associations might not do that. That's I could agree to do it, but some might not.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have two questions. One directed more at Swindon Borough Council, one at the housing associations, if you will. So, the first one for Swindon Borough Council is essentially what is the size of our waiting list at the moment, and what's the average wait time on these? Is it improving, getting worse?
Average wait. So the waiting list, we do publish that on the council webpage. So it's around about 3,300, and it has actually significantly gone down since October 2022, where it's closer to 7,000. But that's purely down to we're doing now yearly reviews. So those who's on the housing register are generally on the housing register, and we've validated all the needs and everything from that side. In regards to wait times, I suppose let's probably Bambi, so that's housing need. On average, most wait times are now currently around about 5 years, and it could be longer if you're looking for a specific area, if you only want to go to one part of the for larger properties, 5+6 bed, we don't have that great deal, so that can be longer. So it's difficult to predict because everything is changeable. Wait times could get reduced if we have a big housing development for social housing, like we had the Queen's Drive a couple of years back. But if you haven't got that, you're then relying on that old stock coming back around and we just don't know when that's going to happen. And that'll be similar to those we advertise for the housing associations, because once again, they'll only get property back if it's in death or termination or something from there. So that's a lot more difficult. But on average, if we say around about 5 years, we're not too far from that's Band B. So in regards to that, Band A could be around about 2.5 years. But that's once again, that can fluctuate because we may have somebody on Band A who needs a very specific bungalow or something from that side of things. So that wait time may be longer to somebody who wants a first floor flat. So on that.
Okay, no, thank you for that. No, that answers that question. I suppose you're right. It's depends what aspects of it you look at. But thank you very much for the answer. So for the housing associations, I wish I could ask all of them this, but we've got 3 here tonight, which is fantastic. Swindon Borough Council over the last, well, as long as I've been in the Borough Council anyway, has been investing a lot of money in its stock to improve energy efficiency. That helps, for the most part, in the first instance, the owner, not the owner, the tenant, helps reduce costs, and then it also has the secondary benefits of being better for the environment as well. But I see the cost savings to the tenant is the primary reason we're doing this. I appreciate that housing associations generally have newer stock, because that's my impression anyway, but obviously there will still be old ones in there. Are you looking at programmes or currently rolling out programmes to these older properties, or generally less efficient ones to help the bills that people might be facing? If you want to...
Yeah, so I think it will probably be similar for a lot of associations, but we run a cyclical programme of improvement works at our properties. We have stock condition surveys on a regular basis to look at the condition of stock in particular areas, and we do a certain number of improvement works throughout the country on the sort of neediest properties, and those are assessed sort of every year. Yeah, so we do it. We probably only do 10 housing schemes a year for energy efficiency across the country, which is actually very few. Yeah, it's a proportion, so, but yes, we do.
Yeah, like you say, it is similar. So stock condition surveys, regular planned works, improvement works. We have our own in-house sustainability team as well, who specifically look at targeting the harder to treat properties that are typically around sort of an EPC rating of F and above, to try and raise them up to Band C. So that generally tends to be the more innovative projects, looking at new technologies, not just air source or ground source heat pumps, but looking at whole house technology, smart technology. Because as you say, the focus is on reducing the cost for customers and running their home, but there is a long-term management and maintenance benefit for us as a landlord as well. So that covers what we learn in our new build, then gets passed on to the sustainability team and vice versa.
Just to echo really what the others have said, very similar. And we have seen a lot of success by already using air source heat pumps and solar panels and so on in many properties. I think as an organisation, we have a commitment by 2030 to have all properties Band B and above for EPC rating. So we're still working towards that. But yes, and there is an in-house sustainability team. We have, yeah.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you.
You ignoring me, Claire.
No, you came in 4th, but I will duly defer to yourself.
I'm happy for you.
Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Councillor Healy, for noticing waiting frantically through the beginning. Just give some context on the difference between housing associations and council housing. Council housing, the tenant pays the rent, and services are generally included in that. Housing associations, they have the rent plus service charges. Now, if you Google housing associations and problems and other things, you will see the service charges is a big problem across the country and the sector. as I said, I have an interest in this. My father is 83, he has dementia, and he was staying in the Stillwater complex until last year. Now, Terence and Velma, back in 2022, they all received massive hikes in the service charges. My father's went, my rent and service charge went from 130 to 185 pounds. That's a lot of money. We're talking 40%. Now, if you've been in council accommodation, that would not have happened. But there's a lack of government legislation to stop that. I hope it's something that's being done at the moment. I don't know. But talking about vulnerable people who are on fixed income, and basically at Windmill Court, they were told to claim housing benefits and also pension credit to make up the shortfall. Now, I'm asking the council, can we find out how much the housing benefit bill has increased because Stormwater put up their service charges by such a large amount a few years ago? I know we're not getting the answer today, but can we look into that further?
Anything on housing benefit which should be directed over to Andy Stevens, so who may be able to answer that question. Or we don't have it.
Sorry, can I just come in on this as well? That housing benefit is paid through SBC in a way, but it comes direct from the government, so it's at no cost to SBC. It's a taxpayer cost further up the scheme. Because that gentleman there sort of said, could we employ somebody full time to look at housing benefit? It wouldn't be us, it would be the government it comes from, not us.
Well, there are costs involved to SBC in processing the claims. The money has to come from somewhere. So initially, Swindon Borough Council was paying that. Now, that creates another burden in that residents want to transfer from housing associations to council. Now, I think could you tell me, because what's the average cost of, say, like a single person sheltered flat?
Can I just say that it would be difficult to say the average in a way, because it depends again on when somebody's been in that flat from. If they were in it originally from when it was built, their rent is lower than if somebody moves in next week, because it's the way rents can be charged. So whilst it's still only 50% of what is the affordability rent, it would be still higher than what someone was paying. So when the increases went on, it's still, because when I sit at Tashby, it's someone go, oh, well, that's okay, because mine's only gone up like this. Someone else will go, that's a bit higher for me. So it's very difficult to say the average rent on somewhere.
Well, if you look at comparable places in Freshbrook, you've got Elsevier Court, which is Council Road, and then Windmill Court, which is run by Stillwater, and Elsevier, of course, just over £100, whereas Stillwater is nearly £200. So you can see the difference in why residents want to move from council, from housing association to housing association. So also, I have a question for Marie Reardon from Stormwater. I talked to many residents, such as Delma and Terence, and the wardens handle the increases in service charges, and basically the wardens told residents to apply for pension credit and also housing benefit, putting the responsibility on the local government.
So also we're just kind of drifting into sensitive areas, but we should be careful what we say.
But what I'm saying is, the question, did you encourage wardens to say to people, the council will pay the extra money via housing benefit? Did you actually encourage people to do that?
I'm not in a position to be able to answer that question. I work within the development directorate, so that's the new build side. What I can say is that I will take away any questions that you have, and I will ensure that you do get a full response to them. That's all I can say at this time.
But what residents told me was that the residents were basically told, you've got a problem, stormwater, can't afford the electricity bills, you sort it out by applying for council benefit and pension credit. That was what I was told by many residents. So would you be able to investigate that?
Yes, I can certainly look into that and provide a response.
Also, when residents, it was a very stressful experience for my father, having his rent go from 130 rented service charges from 130 pounds to 180 pounds, and he's got dementia and menopause.
Chair. Sorry, Councillor Wilson, to put a question there. I think it's important that part of this committee's remit, we consider matters more generally rather than specific individual cases. If there's individual cases which you wish to have discussed with a specific housing association, then it's better that you take them specifically with the housing association. And the purpose of today's meeting is to understand how the council works with housing associations and the provision of housing functions. And just one more point, I think, whilst we've had a number of housing associations in the room today, again, I think we need to exercise some caution about naming specific housing associations. This is the role of Scrutiny to look at the relationships more generally with housing associations. So that would be my advice to you, Chair and Committee.
The reason I gave examples to my father was to set a context, to give a real life case, yeah? And then because the problems stormwater and other housing caused by big service charges, they put the responsibility onto council officers having to deal with housing benefit claims and also tenants looking to be rehoused. So that's an important issue. Yeah. I was frankly disgusted, by behaviour of certain housing associations. I mean, the reason why all this came about, because housing associations had heating contracts with energy suppliers such as EDF or whoever. Now, those contracts ran out during the pandemic and also Ukraine conflict. Now, have the housing associations put in safeguards to stop heating prices going up so much and then passing it on to residents on a fixed income? Have you got policies in place that so that residents don't have to face massive increases in service charges in the future?
We do engage in practices to try and maintain reasonable costs on our services. There's competitive tendering that goes on, so it'll be the same for everybody with the suppliers that we go for. Costs have increased a lot in recent years across a number of fronts. You mentioned energy costs. There are additional regulatory practices that we're having to engage in and that are becoming more costly around fire and all sorts of things. This year we put in a £10 limit, £10 a week limit on service charge increases, but that's not like a regulatory framework that's encouraging that. It's just because residents struggling to pay, different associations will be taking different approaches to that.
Right, can we hear from the other housing association with their approaches?
Similarly, we have contracts with our suppliers, and as a commercial contracts. The thing that's difficult is that we'll never be able to have indefinite contracts. So I don't think there's any way to completely safeguard ever having increases imposed again. That's a bit something I'm never allowed to commit to. So there may well be increases in the future. But yes, we do try to commit to contracts for as long as we can to keep those prices stable.
I'm not sure there's much more I can add to what's already been said, but there is a lot of work that goes into looking at these contracts and ensuring value for money for customers. We don't have full control over.
Councillor Wilson, if I can push on with this. Do you each have safeguarding vulnerability policies in place to make sure that you aren't putting residents in a compromised position and ensuring that they claim all the benefits that they are eligible for?
Again, I imagine it's the same. We have teams in the business who, for anybody that is struggling financially, deal specifically with that issue to make sure that they're claiming all the benefits they should be, and to help them with any financial support they need.
Yes, exactly the same, but also Stonewater set up the Longley Foundation that was specifically put in place to help our customers where benefits and other sort of financial assistance doesn't actually cover everything. So they do assistance grants and things like that. So we have colleagues that help our customers make grant applications to the Longley Foundation.
Sorry, yes.
Good. Final follow up, then we'll move on.
One problem was that when residents were contacted by a housing association, they weren't given a named person, they weren't given a return phone number, they weren't given email addresses, and they weren't given letters. Now, and each resident basically had to haggle for their own price. The residents in the back could confirm this. And it was only when residents were talking to each other they found out that people were on different contracts and on different rates. Now, have housing associations got safeguarding things in place to make sure they do the customer services properly? They don't phone somebody up from a private number. They don't say my name is blah 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 very quickly so that the person has a point of contact. Remember, we're dealing with vulnerable people in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So do you have the safeguards in place to make sure that changes are properly documented? From my experience, talking to residents at the one place, Swindon Court, that wasn't put in place. So residents had to negotiate their own deal and they didn't get anything in writing. So have you got the safeguards in place to make sure that the service charge process is fair and properly documented?
Sorry, there's two parts to that there. Are you saying that each of the residents in that scheme were negotiating their own contract with a supplier?
No, they were negotiating it with Stonewater. Basically, each resident had to negotiate their own service charges with Stonewater.
Again, Councillor
That's
Gosling,
not
before
something
you
I've ever
specific
heard of
cases.
before. That's
Yes, it does
not
seem very
how
strange.
service charges generally operate. But in terms of the main contact, very few housing providers, as far as I'm aware, will have direct phone numbers and email addresses for general use. I think Romford, isn't it? You have neighbourhood coaches who are very much, they have such small patches that there's so many direct contact numbers. But for the types of schemes that you're describing, there will be a scheme manager or another person on site that those customers can speak directly to.
Well, I'm glad to hear your housing association provides that in case the scheme in question that wasn't properly provided. So I'm glad you used proper practices.
Councillor Wilson, again, just be careful in how you say these things.
There's too many mics on.
Yeah, it's often the case with the larger associations who operate over like a large area. The service charges are often calculated and formed by a central team that are based somewhere else in the country. So where you want complex breakdowns of those service charges and how they're calculated, you're dealing with this small central service somewhere else. We will have a local person who will help you liaise with those people, but that person at a local level won't necessarily be able to help with the complex financials.
All right, I'm glad to hear you also good practice in the case.
I feel I have to say something. I will talk in generic terms because I can't speak about any specific issues that may or may not have happened. But when it comes to changes to rents and service charges, it is scrutinised by a centralised team, but it is always put in writing. And it would be highly unusual. In fact, I would echo your comments. I've never heard of a situation where customers would negotiate directly on their own individual service charges.
All I would say is talk to the residents of Windmill Court. There's two back there who will beg to differ.
Can I make one more general point about so in terms of the rules and people being notified, there are regulatory practices that you have to engage in with notifying people about service charges. There are certain letters and notifications that have to go out at certain times of year. It might be useful to, if those are understood, but that's something you can hold as the council to if people aren't getting the information they need.
Well, I've not heard any complaints about Guinness or sanctuary, just stormwater.
Councillor Shelley, then Crackfire.
Thank you very much. Evening, thank you everybody for coming and for your time today, particularly got 3 housing associations, but my list is probably about 20 long, so it's great that you're the people who came tonight. I haven't really got a difficult question, but I've got, I'm currently chair of planning, and one thing I've noticed is that some planning applications have come to us, and it says on your scheme here that we're aiming at 30%, and we're lucky to get 20% of houses to be taken on for affordable or social letting. It'd be really helpful to know why is it that sometimes we can't find a housing association that's in a position to take on those houses that are available on that development. Now, in Swindon, and obviously with the government's new planning ideas, we're looking at trying to maximise the use of brownfield sites as well as outside of Swindon. So necessarily some of those are going to be fairly small, or you're not going to look at hundreds of houses on one site. And I'm assuming that the problem is there because it's not too many. But you're probably not in a position to give me an answer to this, but perhaps somebody could send me. What is it that's holding us back from maximising the number of houses we can get on new developments taken on by our housing associations, and what can we do to really work together to ramp that up? Because I think that we've got over 3,000 people on the list, and I'd really like to see that list go down a bit more. So you don't have to answer that now, but just.
Well, it'd be useful to get some initial thoughts, please. Get some of my list of questions.
Yeah.
Is that percentage through 106 the best way to leverage investment, or are there other approaches, whether it's off-site allowances or however, that would fundamentally make a difference to you?
So it's a very good question. Section 106 is there's a number of issues at play there. So scale is always going to be one. So where you have sites that are relatively small, so you're only getting a handful of affordable homes through your 20 or 30%, you will struggle to find housing associations that are in a position to take them on, because whether you're dealing with 5 new homes or 50 new homes, it's the same amount of resource you need from your development team. So it's difficult to stack up a build programme of lots of very small developments, if you like, and we still have to put quite a lot of resource into dealing with the developers and taking on their affordables. We do building our own. What's happened in the last 18 months is with the operating environment, financial constraints, whether that's inflation, bill costs going up, changes to the rents that we can charge, housing associations, business plans, financial pots have been massively squeezed. As you mentioned earlier, we've had huge numbers of regulatory changes, so cost increases in terms of the services that we deliver to our customers, as well as the amount of money we then have left to build new homes. And not every housing association is in a position to build new homes because of those financial constraints. So recently, those housing associations that would have been interested in buying the Section 106 homes are now backing away from that and focusing on building their own homes. And a lot of that is to do with quality as well, is what we find with house builder new build homes. So they don't meet the same standard as what we're building ourselves. And that can come down to size, it can come down to components and specification, and also just the layout within a development. In terms of what could happen as a council to sort of increase that supply, I think it's actually about getting house builders and housing associations and the council around a table together and identifying where there are 106 homes that haven't been contracted on and who's in the best position to take those on. The house builders need to understand that the days of getting the highest price continuously are kind of over now for Section 106s, and there's kind of a plateau in terms of price, and that all goes into their viability of their developments as well. So there needs to be sort of a rebalancing, I guess, in terms of where house builders look to secure and offer on land to build, and therefore the partnership with the housing associations in terms of what they're prepared to buy.
That's really helpful, thank you. I'm not going to ask any more questions.
I'm going to follow up on that. So based on what you kind of said there is a question of scale. So where you've got pet plotting or small scale sites, is any housing association really going to be in a position to step in and do that? Or should there be more flexibility on the council's planning approach, where its developments of a certain size are on site and by default, something below, say, 10, it's a financial contribution to do this location? Could the council do its own land assets in a slightly different way to secure those kind of designated sites? What can the council do differently with housing associations rather than just getting around the table?
So the only concern with converting on-site housing delivery to commuted sums is, are there the sites available to then utilise the commuted sum to build the homes that you need? And often what a developer will negotiate on a viability argument to generate the commuted sum won't necessarily be the amount of money that the housing association would then need to be able to build those homes. So it doesn't always correlate. I think it is worth considering talking to the housing associations that are on your preferred partner list to see who is in the market for smaller numbers of Section 106 homes, because there are smaller housing associations with smaller development programmes that will still look to take them on. But if there are a number of schemes, is there a way of packaging them together so it makes it more attractive to a housing association? So Stonewater generally wouldn't consider anything fewer than 20 Section 106 homes on the site, but there'll be other housing associations that may go to 10 or to 5. I think it's understanding sort of that appetite is a good starting point. But I do also think that if there is a way of providing information on brownfield sites to housing associations to see if any of them would be viable for affordable housing delivery is a really good place to be. I mean, Swindon also build certainly yourselves, but that would certainly be another good way to look at upping the number of affordable homes that can be built.
Well, you've got the development director here.
Fine. I guess then, is there, you're obviously based on business plans. Will you be able to actually respond to that demand in specific markets, or are you saying you've got 100 homes a year is what you can realistically achieve capacity-wise in your 3-year period, and that's it? You can't necessarily go 150, 200 and scale it quickly that way.
So that will definitely come down to the housing association, but from Stonewater's point of view, we do an annual review of our business plan. So yes, we plan 3 and 5 years, but every year we review it. And because of the nature of development, which is actually quite difficult to control. You will have schemes that will end up stuck in planning for quite some time. I'm sure people around the table will understand the difficulties that there are with planning applications being determined due to resources and all sorts of issues. There's always flexibility within a development programme, so we always look to move as quickly, we call it being agile, so we look to have the ability to pick up opportunities as they arise, as well as planning longer term. So we are at the moment very much focused on our Homes England strategic partnership programme with the SPP2 currently, but we've got our eyes on the next funding round, so we are already looking at what opportunities can we secure with our local authority partners and housing partners. So that will be now, 2 years' time, 5 years' time. So it does depend on the housing association.
No, nothing to add to that.
Right. What would a 2-bed terrace house then be construction cost if you were to do it through, say, community sums rather than the developer building it and kind of handing the keys over to you? What kind of numbers are we talking about?
So I can't tell you for a 2-bed, but there was a recent report published that said that, and they did this across the country, the average cost to build a 3-bedroom home, so that doesn't include land, is £200,000. And so in a lot of local authority areas, it costs more to build that home than you could necessarily sell it on the open market. And so then if you're looking at charging a social rent at 50% of the market rent, or an affordable rent, which is 80% including the service charge, you can see the difficulties in terms of the viability, being able to make it stack up, the real need to work in partnership with local authorities, landowners, and also Homes England grant funding.
Councillor Hamilton.
I just have one question, which is a slight follow-up from Councillor Shays on the section 106 side of things. So you mentioned about how it was sort of 50 was sort of the lower limit. Are you, when these sorts of schemes come forward from developers, from the council, planning commission, etc., are you tendering to take on the houses, or are you being approached by the council developers to say, we've got this plot, are you interested? How does that sort of process work?
So what has traditionally been the approach is, as you say, a developer, a house builder would get their planning consent. Generally, part of the 106 will say that they need to have a housing association signed up to buy those affordable homes. They will go out and effectively ask us to bid against each other, so that they get best value for those homes. Is generally been the approach. As I was saying earlier, because of the financial constraints in the current operating environment, a lot of housing associations backed away from that. So house builders are struggling to find somebody.
It's a double challenge, isn't it? Where you obviously won't go below a certain amount because of the viability, but also if the cost for the 3-bed is £200,000, you also have to make the numbers work on your side if you're renting at a low market rate as well, and that's part of the squaring those two off as part of the problem.
Yeah. And the other thing, just to say very quickly, the difference between a Section 106 home and a home that we build for ourselves is that a Section 106 home is affordable in perpetuity, which massively affects the long-term value of that property. So housing associations generally work by funding ourselves through our rents, what we sell in terms of shared ownership, but also effectively a giant mortgage that we raise against our property portfolio. So we can only raise so much against the Section 106, which is significantly less than what we could borrow for a home that we've built ourselves. So again, there's that to take into account as well when looking at your overall programme and viability.
Davis?
So a couple of questions, if I may. I could have asked them earlier, but give other people a chance. Just to pick up on Mr. Griffith's question about, I think the question was, are leaseholders treated differently, and are there any challenges there?
Leaseholders will be in receipt of exactly the same services that renters are. There are differences in terms of what they pay in some senses, but no, it's all the same services. But a leasehold agreement has certain conditions. It's a different contract that we have with our leaseholders than we have with our tenants. the services that we provide are all the same.
Would you mind just explaining the difference?
So some renters won't be paying service charges directly. Certain affordable rent customers won't be paying service charges directly. But other than that, it's the same.
For us, it's very similar, the way we calculate services and pass on those costs. But the main difference is whether there's a leasehold agreement or a tenancy agreement and what the terms and conditions are in each of those agreements. So the lease will always say things that that person is responsible for paying, and those will be the charges that we pass on.
Okay, well, thank you for answering that. So I had a more different question. About fly tipping. It's a scourge across Swindon and the UK. But how is it dealt with on these estates? Because there are various estates where it's really bad, and I think because if they're privately owned, I think by the housing associations, it's not borough council to deal with them, I think, but it's for the housing associations to deal with them. Is that an accurate representation, and is that working?
I would take that one. I would say it's an accurate representation. It is a challenge, I won't lie, it's very difficult. We have some schemes across the country, not just here, where there are real problems with fly tipping, and our priority is always to keep them as clean and as tidy and as pleasant as possible. What I would say is that I think sometimes people will find that we might take longer to deal with things than people would necessarily like. So it would be nice for everybody if we would just swoop in the next day and clear items that have been left. The approach we've been taking to it is to try to investigate the perpetrator of the fly tipping, because any costs that are incurred in clearing it are going to be revisited on our residents. And, you know, we have vulnerable people on limited incomes, and it's either going to be unnecessary costs for them, or it's going to increase the housing benefit bill because fly tipping is an eligible service charge cost. So yes, there might be times where people feel we're taking an inordinate amount of time to do that, because we might be working with people and trying to investigate where it's come from to clear it, so that it doesn't happen again, to stop it from recurring. So I imagine there are a couple of schemes I could mention off the top of my head where people might have concerns about the level of fly tipping, but it's something that we manage. It just takes a long time. It's very time consuming.
Just to follow up on that, is the way that it works, you would clear the fly tipping and then charge the residents for having done so?
Yes. So, okay, so if we're not able to identify who has dumped items somewhere, it could be a resident, it could be somebody who has come to a scheme and just left it and gone away. If it's not possible to identify who has dumped those items there, then we as landlord will clear those items and the cost will be spread across the entire scheme. It's a scheme management cost. The time we're taking is to try to figure out who the perpetrator is. We've rolled out CCTV at schemes, or we have reports from specific neighbours who might be able to shed light on where it's come from. And then we'd either work with individuals, if the residents there, to ensure that they clear it, or help support them find ways to maybe get to the tip if they don't drive or they don't have funds. Yes, so yeah, that's why it's taking longer, but it's to stop there being unfair costs on everybody. I just think it's the fairest way to try to identify where it's coming from.
Okay, do you have any sort of idea of how successful it is in terms of identifying perpetrators?
Yes, so at one scheme, one of my housing officers has identified 3 perpetrators this year, so in the last 3 months.
And is that?
And it has been able to, on 2 occasions, recharge those individuals for the entirety of the costs. So the assumption is that they won't do it again. On the other one, it was to work with somebody to get them to remove it themselves.
So it's residents of the scheme rather than
On
non-residents?
those cases, those were residents of the scheme.
And is there, on developing Councillor Davis's point, do you find non-residents fly tipping in your land?
Occasionally, yes.
And how do you get on with the council addressing those kind of problems? Are there ways in which we can improve our processes, or do you involve us at any point?
I'd always interested that the council wouldn't deal with this.
We report it's very difficult a lot of the time to identify whether, if you're not identifying a precise perpetrator, it's very difficult to identify whether they're non-resident or resident. But when we do find out a non-resident is parking there, we've got any information about them whatsoever, we'll let the police know, we'll let the local authority know. And sometimes, we might get some investigation that produces the perpetrator, but majority of times no, and the evidence is often poor. And residents do pick up the cost directly, and it is a common complaint. And as we get better at clearing fly tipping, the costs are getting higher. We've gotten better in the last 2 or 3 years at keeping our estates clear, and that does have an impact on the service charges. The same is true of clearing items from within the blocks that we do really diligently now because of fire safety. That's also one.
This is where I wouldn't necessarily understand the legal aspect, and maybe it's the legal officer can answer it. The council has certain powers, such as being able to issue fixed penalties for fly tippers. You, as a housing associations, don't have that because effectively you have operators in that sense. But is there a way in which the council should be working with you to do those activities?
I would say, from our perspective, and you may have a different impression, we're actually pretty proactive in engaging with the local authority and with the police where we think that they can assist, because we're really interested in preventative measures. There's costs and there's all the work and activity around fly tipping. We're really keen to, and the local officers who are dealing with this stuff are really keen to be proactive and go out there. So I'm not sure, as long as when we're contacting the local authority about these things, they're taking the matter seriously, we're happy. We don't need outreach from local authorities. We're going to go to local authorities where we think we can get some assistance.
Thank you. Other question? Right.
I just wanted to very quickly take the chance to go back to the original questions from the public. It's probably very obvious by now that as a local authority, we have absolutely no jurisdiction, power, authority or governance or oversight over our housing association colleagues. But there are agencies that do, and those agencies also apply to us. So every single social landlord in the UK is overseen by the regulator of social housing. That applies equally to local authorities and housing associations. You can also take complaints, go to your relevant landlord and go through their complaints process, but then you can go to the housing ombudsman and they will advocate on your behalf. And if you're a leaseholder, and I apologise, it's been a few years since I went, but I think it's called the First Tier Tribunal, and you can approach them to help resolve service charge queries. So when you said County Swindon employs somebody to do this, no, we can't. And there is no law that would allow us to do that. But there are a number of agencies that will do that on your behalf. So make sure you reach out to them, and whoever is your landlord.
So thank you for that point. I guess it would be, again, to the housing associations, what are your rates of complaints? Like you say, public figures, or are you kind of happy to say a general, I can't know how to phrase it, stats in mind when it comes to just how many complaints you get versus you're able to resolve and it's not a problem before it goes to those kind of regulatory perspectives?
Personally, I would have to go back and get those stats. I don't have them in my head, but we can certainly get them.
Yeah, exactly the same. And yeah, we can publish those stats.
So is this just for Swindon Borough Council area, you mean, not national?
And how often or are your residents fully aware of what that complaints process is? Because if it's done, sent 5, 6, 10 years ago, are they really aware today of what those routes available to them are?
Well, it's a good question. We do publicise our complaints procedure and process. It's available online through the My Home Hub. We did do a big piece of work that I think probably a lot of housing associations did, where it's almost like a newsletter kind of approach that went out to all customers to make them aware of the processes. I'm sure there's more that we could do, but yeah, we definitely do try and make it clear that there is that process available.
And same for Sanctuary very much. We also did a review with the Ombudsman and implemented their guidelines in our complaints procedure, so staff should be trained and aware to how to identify a complaint and be able to process it.
Yeah, very similar. We'll have them sort of publicised on our websites what customers need to do to raise a complaint, or staff receive training on complaints. I think it's either every year or every 3 years our staff receive training on complaints. There was recent Ombudsman advice adopted to if the customer asks for a complaint to be raised, if you can't resolve it, the thing within 24 hours. Then it's got to go through a certain process. Yeah, and we notify our residents of these things in many ways.
Moving on and back onto the topic of consultation, how do you consult leaseholders and tenants when it comes to rent increases and service charges? I know as a council we've got quite well developed, and we'll vote on it annually to note what that plan for the HRA is, as recommended by Cabinet. How do you do it in your world?
So I think so. Practices will vary, but there are certain types of consultations around service charge increase, where a service charge increase within a financial year after the estimate is made. You get your estimate in February. And if the costs are going up significantly, or if major works above a certain amount are going up a certain amount within that year, there's a certain consultation process that's a regulatory practice, like it's call it Section 20 leasehold. I can't remember, Leasehold Act or something. And that's all. There's notifications have to go out to all the residents. They have to have an opportunity to feedback within a given time frame. All that kind of stuff. Outside of that, different associations will have different practices with regard to consultations. Within our older persons housing, we tend to have residents meetings a number of times a year, because those have community facilities and things like that. But we don't have a formal consultation process for our other types of general needs schemes.
And same for the general needs schemes, it's very much an annual notification rather than consultation. The no, it's done. Sorry, something in my screen sorry.
It's very similar, yeah. So annual rent letters go out.
Anything else on people?
Well, I just have one semi follow up on that. I can't remember your name, sorry, but mentioned about the regulated social housing overseeing everybody, and they set out a maximum rent increase each year. So that's part of the consultation as you go through that process. How often are you as housing associations taking or requesting the maximum rent increase that the regulator is capping you at versus taking, asking for a lower rate of increase? Yeah, I don't have the answer to that right now. I'm not expecting that.
Well, I don't have the answer, but my best guess would be maximum all the time. Because it's necessary.
The council also know. I think the council also was touching on that point as well. About the difference in rental costs with the housing association and the council.
I know that SB6 we vote on every year. We're not necessarily taking the maximum, and that potentially causing some of the disconnect between residents and their wish to move to different types of social housing. But I'm not supposed to have that number off here.
I think we're maxing it out every year. I'll get confirmation, but I'm pretty sure that's right.
Can I just come in on that? It's the rents they originally set, which are higher than what we set. So any rent increase obviously is always going to be more than what we have.
Yeah. So I mean in percentage terms, sorry.
Yeah.
Not absolutely, but yeah.
Just on the SPC side, on the service charge aspect, obviously those are valid charges for communal areas in particular or other activities. Where do those costs sit for HRA residents? Because the tab still needs to be picked up from somewhere. Is it rolled into the rent? So effectively the council rent is rent plus service charges. They don't sit that way. Or is it a wholly separate additional within housing associations?
Again, I think it's tenure specific. So sheltered housing, for example, is different from general needs. We'd have to come back to you, but it depends what specifically you're asking about.
It's specifically around budgets and income that says, are we actually significantly different from housing associations because we have a similar kind of regime when it comes to rents, but we keep on coming back onto the service charges aspect of it. So where does the tab get picked up on SBC if we aren't leveraging or levying service charges ourselves? Because obviously it's ring fenced and it's not covered by general fund council tax.
Yes. Yeah, because obviously the service charge is the cost of the services. It depends what services every agency is offering. I know we are about to do a review of our service charges. I don't want to comment on in which direction I think that will take it. But it's been a while, I think, since the council did that, and it's long overdue.
Can I say it depends on what the particular thing, we tend to keep it roughly the same. We don't tend to have like 2% here, 5%, we tend to keep it the same. But it depends on what people have as well. So the service charges go on garages, but it's not necessarily all council tenants, because not all council tenants rent garages. It could be someone in the private sector. So it depends on the service and where the service sits as to what the increase is. So I should imagine with housing associations, it's the same. But I mean, we tend to stick with, like this year it was 5%, and I can't remember what the other percent was, which was lower. We tended to stick with that for service charges, depending on which service charge it was. I don't know if they're more all over the place with their, you know, so they go, it's 10% here, 2% there, 4%.
It's more the council isn't doing anything unique in the sense of we should be looking at service charges, whereas housing associations are kind of ahead of the curve in that sense. But if we're doing a review of that in the coming year, then maybe that's something separate.
I think we acknowledge we could be a lot more transparent in our service charges moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking through my questions. How many properties do you each operate? Appreciate you only 3 of what's in Swindon. We know council's 1, but for each of you, how many firms do you operate?
In Swindon?
Yes.
About 450 units.
I think Sanctuary's about 1,000 units, just within Swindon.
I did look at the number and I've forgotten, so I'll have to let you know, I'm afraid.
But we know you are largest. I think that's my list covered as well. Any other comments from members? No? In which case I will say thank you for our visitors today. It's been very useful and informative. I've tried to put some notes as we've been going along in terms of recommendations or next steps for everybody. So to run through the points, it's a list of all housing associations in Swindon and how many properties of each, and ideally people any points of contact to go to community services. In particular, that was to assist us with raising cases on residents' behalf. It will be a point in time, so if it is circulated to members, it is the onus to contact individual housing associations and seeing what we can do. But if there's a definitive list, then at least we can kind of start that ball rolling if you aren't already engaged. There's a point about some useful stats from the housing associations, whether it's like rates of complaints, anything useful that you think may be informative, please. And I think there was very much something around the planning process and looking at the officers and housing associations around Section 106. So I think it's certainly one that we should probably delve into further. Whether this is the right forum, probably not. Maybe it's a task and finish group to look at separately and report back at a future meeting. But it certainly sounds like there's some conversation to be had there. We've got the local plan regulation 18 this year. I think it's next year it's 19. So the planning policies are certainly right for us to discuss further. Anything else on anything else? Councillor Watson?
About some of the stuff that I mentioned, is that in there?
I think they're questions directed via committee services for written follow-up answers rather than points to the committee. Unless you've got a specific point you'd like us to
just
catch up on.
How much, that's committee services, just how much is paid out in housing benefit to housing associations, particularly in the last couple of years. Has it gone up a lot? I suspect it has. Because of energy charges and increased service charges. Thanks.
Can I just come back on that question, because where my confusion lies within that question is how do you know it's because of that? Because it could be people who've moved in that have to claim housing benefit. So how do you know it's directly affected by what council will? I think it's a very difficult thing for someone to work out.
It is. I think it's what we don't know. What we don't know around those figures, and if we did at least get the headline numbers, so this is the increase in housing benefit payments in housing. Let's see where it goes on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Shelley was an indication. No. Okay.
Answer my question.
Okay. Dr. Davis.
Just very quickly, in terms of contact details, I think they are all on the Borough Council website, but it's, well, lots of them are anyway, just so you know. But it's a case of, just making sure that councillors can use those.
It's very much that point of contact is the most useful way forward. I'll say,
Councillor Heenan, as a member of the general public, I actually asked a question which was specifically to go to the stonewater lady. When am I going to get an answer to that? Because there's some of the things that the stonewater lady said I know are not facts. Because I'm actually a South Swindon Parish Councillor, and I've actually had to deal with some issues on housing in stonewater. I won't run into it.
So we need to be careful with what we kind of say.
Yes, that's why I'm not going to go into it. Because the lady's son could not get an answer, and he'd been going over 2 years.
So your point has been raised and noted down by committee services, and we'll make sure that it is provided outside the meeting, and that you'll get a written response, which will go to the committee. If you don't hear from us soon, then please do follow us up again. But committee services and our visitors usually are pretty good when it comes to that, because we're part of the formal public stated questions now.
Oh, it's all right. If I don't hear anything, I'll be chasing you.
Please do. Okay, and I guess there's just a final point. If you've got any thoughts or colleagues at the offices about how the council could improve its way of working with yourselves, please do ask and feed it back to us. It will be useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll just have 30 seconds while leave, and we'll move on to the next item. Thames Water.